Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. A little over 10 years ago, HBO did a mini-series called Band of Brothers. Has anybody watched Band of Brothers? It's been pretty famous since it was aired originally. I think a lot of us have seen it. Band of Brothers was the story of Easy Company, a group of guys who served together as paratroopers in World War II. It was a cool miniseries. It started from the very beginning, the first episode taking place on American soil as we were kind of introduced to the men of Easy Company, and they were gathering for the first time to do training in preparation for war. And eventually the show progressed, and they worked their way to England, and then they were paratrooped, dropped into France on D-Day, back in a little ways. The show continued to progress from Normandy to places like Bastogne. One episode even told the story of Easy Company coming upon a concentration camp. I mean, it was an incredibly powerful show. And it was based on the real Easy Company and the people who lived and fought in World War II, lived and died. And so often the shows would begin or they would end with little bits of interviews of one of the guys that actually lived and fought, that the characters were playing them. Just really powerful to see the actual guys that you'd been watching their characters along in the show, and to see the actual men who are the heroes of that show talking about their experiences. One of the very fun moments in the show, and there were some fun moments in the show. I'm kind of late in the series. Perhaps the last episode, or maybe second to last episode. And at that point in the story, the war was sort of winding down, and Hitler had been forced out of his mountain hideaway, the Eagle's Nest. And so Easy Company was one of the very first groups that had access to the Eagle's Nest. They're one of the first ones in there. And so in one scene, there's a runner that kind of goes to get the second in command of Easy Company, Captain Nixon, I think was his name. And he tells him he needs to hurriedly go to this certain place. And it's ironic at this point in the story because nothing is really hurried. They're all kind of relaxing. The war is pretty much over. And so they bring Nixon to this huge barn, this structure, and it has American guards guarding it. Again, strange because the Germans are kind of rooted out, and it's just the Americans kind of hanging out and celebrating. So it's kind of a curious moment. And so this number 2, Nixon, they take him down this set of stairs past the guards and into this huge, big, cavernous room. And initially, the camera doesn't show the room. It just shows Nixon in this face of astonishment and wonderment. And then the camera pans around, and it's this gigantic room full of shelves, thousands of shelves of wine. Apparently, it was Hitler's personal stash of wine. And so the runner looks to Nixon and says, Captain Winters, the head of Easy Company, knows how much you love wine, and says, you have first dibs, take as much as you want. And then he does. It's a cool scene. In some ways, I think about that now, and I think about how foolish it was for Hitler and the Germans to have such a cellar in the midst of war, a place of such abundance. I mean, in the end, all of that aging, all of that coveting, all of that treasure, all of that wine wound up being drank. Well, some of the people appreciated it like Nixon, but a lot of American soldiers went in there and just grabbed whatever they could find and started partying around their campsites or wherever they were. Certainly not the event that Hitler and the Germans had in mind as they were storing up all that wine. I thought of that scene from Band of Brothers as I thought and read through this story from Matthew about the woman with the alabaster jar of oil this week. Those jars of oil in the first century they're quite a luxury. Matthew even says that in the text of this story about how costly the oil was. And they were very, very expensive. And jars of oil like this had 2 roles in the life of people in the first century. The first and primary role was you'd use it for people who had died. You'd wash their bodies with the oil. It was part of their ritual, but it was also part of the cleanliness and part of the really good smell that it would bring to people after they had passed away. And the second purpose of a jar of oil like this in the first century was to anoint a king. If you were fortunate enough in the first century to be near a king or be in the presence of the king, you would take your special and saved up oil and you would do exactly what this woman did to Jesus. You would gently and ritualistically pour it over the king's head to show your love and your care and your recognition that this is the king and the king is worth this. So when we hear this story, immediately we recognize something beautiful and powerful is going on in the actions of this woman. She has saved up this oil probably for that first reason, for her family members, that when they die, she can use this oil in this faithful Jewish ritual sort of way. But she hears that Jesus is near. And so she seeks him out and goes to find him. And she recognizes his kingship as in the most powerful way she can by taking this expensive oil and pouring it over his head. And so note, by recognizing that Jesus is king, she's saying who isn't king. She's saying that King Herod is not king. She's saying that Pilate, when he rolls in and has been rolling into Jerusalem for this week of Holy Week, is not king. She is recognizing that Caesar, the emperor, is not king. Jesus is king. I am struck by her. I am struck by her recognizing Jesus as king in her life. I'm struck by the fact that she pours what is likely weeks and weeks, if not months or even years, worth of saving, worth of wages over Jesus' head in just a few moments. I'm struck by the fact that what would have taken so long to accumulate or afford, she generously gives up for just a moment with Jesus. I'm struck by the fleeting moment, by the fleeting nature of that moment, yet overwhelmingly powerful. I am struck by the example of worship that she lives out in that moment. And it makes me think again about Band of Brothers and all of that wine that Hitler was saving up, storing up for a rainy day, yet when the moment comes, he runs away with it without any of it. And it makes me consider the things that in my life maybe I'm holding on to and saving up for that special day, perhaps saving up and holding on to too tightly. The things that perhaps have great value that I have stored away for the right moment, whenever that is. Perhaps I will wait too long holding on to that thing that no one else will see or enjoy, never using it. Do you have things like that in your life? Do you have things in your possession that are of great value, but rarely add value to those lives around you? It makes me think about the way we care for the gifts that God has given us. Money is obviously always an obvious one. It makes me think about the idea of keeping lots of money in our storehouses. There's biblical stories that Jesus tells there along these lines. That we're storing up our things while there is a world to be changed around us. A world where a generous infusion can signal that God is king. Surely we have seen that very inbreaking of God's kingdom on this morning, did we not? We have infused our storage of sacred oil into our community by building a ramp outside our building that allows so many more people to enter into these holy spaces in safer and better ways. Surely we have proclaimed that Jesus is king with this act of generosity. But I think most of all, when I am struck by the actions of that woman from Bethany, I consider the ways in which God has given me gifts, which ways God has treasured me, which ways God has treasured us. God has given us great gifts, individual gifts, gifts of community, gifts that are stored up in each one of us, gifts to sing, gifts to dance, gifts to teach, gifts to listen, gifts to paint, gifts to build ramps, gifts to fix things, gifts to cook, gifts to read, gifts to help people, gifts to hold hands, gifts to stand or sit quietly with somebody else. gifts to make people laugh, gifts to help people cry, gifts of honesty, gifts of trustfulness, gifts of forgiveness, gifts of mercy, gifts to heal, gifts to lead, gifts to convince, gifts to love. Oh, we have so many gifts. What gifts has God put inside you? Or maybe the better question is, what gifts do you have that, like that alabaster jar of oil, need to come pouring out of you, proclaiming that Jesus is King? Amen.